Hello and welcome to AXSChat. We're delighted to have David Pérez with us today. We're going to be talking about accessibility in Latin America and particularly in non-English speaking languages, because this is an area that we feel is underrepresented. It's an area of great opportunity for inclusion if we get this right. Certainly when we were talking with David Baines the other week, it was something that came up again and again, the fact that we have a very Western perspective on what it means to be accessible. So, David, thank you very much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey, how you ended up working in accessibility, and then we'll continue the conversation from there. And I'd just like to say a big shout out to my ClearText, because Elaine, who's here with us today, is providing us with the captions.
Great. Thank you, Neil, and thank you, Antonio and Deborah, for having me. My story with accessibility and inclusion is quite interesting. I actually studied political science in Costa Rica. I then went into a master's in diplomacy, but my main goal was always to do real impact in people's lives. And I noticed that diplomacy was not going to do that for me, because when you're working on diplomacy, you're making all of these big meetings and deals that you don't see the end result of. I wanted to work in somewhere that I could really make an impact on people's lives. That's why I went to UNESCO. And in UNESCO, I found that, but I also found some other difficulties that were happening in UNESCO that didn't allow us to actually develop some of the plans that we had, because I don't know if you guys are aware, but UNESCO is losing a lot of funding. So we had to be very, very specific on the things that we were able to do. And the projects were made to fill up a list. Like, we're doing this. We were not actually focusing on what I wanted to focus. That was the impact that we could have in people's lives. But there at UNESCO was where I met Deborah, and where I started working with accessibility and inclusion. We created a conference, the first conference on ICT and the use of ICTs and on accessibility for Latin and Central America. That was the first conference that was created outside of the main conference that UNESCO had done. I think it was in India. I think it was like 5 years before that. So it was a very big deal, and that's why we had some of the biggest people around accessibility, and that's why Deborah went there. I met her, and a couple of months later, I was out of UNESCO and started speaking with Deborah, and it all came together. I started working with her because we had the same mission to create real impact in the lives of people with disabilities and create something different, not only for the people that are already being able to access it in English or in any other language. We wanted to bring that to Spanish-speaking countries, and that's our mission.
So I know Deborah's got a question, but I just want to follow up on one or two of the things that you said. So we often see what I call tick box inclusion initiatives, whether that be tick box accessibility or meeting the numbers or doing stuff that essentially looks like you're doing something without having real impact. So I get where you're coming from, and credit to you for taking personal action to do something that has more real impact on the world. I'm very interested in your perception of how accessible the world is from a non-English native speaking point of view, and what the differences are between accessibility and the approach to inclusion that you see in the sort of the Anglophone global north, as opposed to Latin America, for example. Because last week I had the pleasure of welcoming the Vice President of Argentina, Gabriela Michetti, to our HQ, and they were interested in finding out what was going on in the UK and what and being part of the sort of Global Disability Summit, and they're undertaking initiatives to try and grow awareness right now. So where do you think Latin America is in sort of A, along that awareness curve, and B, how accessible is is the environment in which you're working in?
Okay, there's a lot of things that we could talk about there, but
Yeah,
I think
sorry.
that I have written a couple of blogs and they're on Root Global Communications site, rootglobal.com, that walk us through these, because the fact is that Latin America follows what the Western world says. So around 1993, all of the countries in Latin America started approving laws to protect the rights of people with disabilities. But what happened with them was that they didn't get applied at all. Nothing happened on most cases. And now, around the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, countries are starting to go again and see those laws and try to implement them, create the rules that they have to create for them to be implemented. So on that sense, on a legal sense, we're making progress, but it's thanks to the global sustainability development goals. It's not thanks to initiatives that come from the country. And on the technology side of accessibility, that's another thing completely, because there's a lot of information that's in English, and there's a lot of tools that are in English. There's a lot of things that I would love for people to be able to access, but they're simply not able to access them because they're in English. It's not their native tongue, and there's no way that they're going to be able to access them. More so considering that, sadly, people with disabilities in Latin America are left out of the educational programs. So they don't have the same access to education. So you can't expect them to speak English. The ones who do great things, like Catalina de Bandas, the rapporteur for disabilities of UNESCO in, I'm not sure where she is, but she is from Costa Rica, and she had the tools, she had the ability, and she made great things with her life. But most people in Latin America and Central America are not given the opportunities that they could have.
So, David, you were saying that a lot of legislation and ideas were being copied from in terms of what was being done in Europe or the United States, and that ended up being copied in South America. Do you see that? No, the fact that we are talking here about two different realities, no, from a social and economical perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You see let's say the need of the countries in, could be Costa Rica, could be Mexico, of Argentina, to rethink that in their own context and see what the best they can do in order to help their population. Because we're talking about it's all about people, but demographics are different, people needs are different, language and culture are different. You can't just copy and paste and there you go, you have magic and accessibility is delivered. What is your say on that?
I try to make always the parallel to other things that are going on in the world. As you've seen, the technology advancements, the economic advancements, they're all being very horizontal. We're getting the same things, and that's because we're all speaking sort of the same language. When we come to accessibility and inclusion, there's that added barrier of education, that people with disabilities are not being able to advocate for themselves, and there's no one interested in advocating for them. So they're losing that ability to take all that information and bring them to their context and create their own things, because that's true. There's no way that we can have a magic recipe of inclusion. If not, we would have already done it. It's something very different in each country, but it can be used with the information that we're getting from the places that are already doing great things. And there's also great things going on in Latin America, but those great things are staying in Latin America because they're not being published in English, and they're not being invited to those conversations. You guys are doing a great job because you have had people like Sebastian from Comprolante here talking about everything that they're doing, and people from Colombia I've noticed. So there's a lot of things that are being done, and you guys are trying to bring up the volume on them. But I think that we need to figure out a way to do it the other way around as well. to bring all the information that you guys are creating in English and bring it in Spanish and create those channels of communication.
One thing that you started doing for us on AXSChat, David, which nobody asked, but we loved it, was you started retweeting some of the prominent AXSChat tweets in Spanish. And then we had other people start joining those conversations. And so it's amazing, if you're speaking the same language, how more people that speak that language join. But so we really appreciate the efforts that you've made with AXSChat and your efforts in Costa Rica. I want to talk just a little bit more about that UNESCO event where we had the pleasure to meet, and you stood out for me, so that when you reached out to me about 6 months later, I was like, oh, no, we have to work together. I was very impressed with you. But one thing that you were doing at UNESCO at the time was you brought in, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there are 7 countries in Central America, but 6 of those countries speak Spanish, and the 7th one speaks French and English. And so UNESCO brought together all 6 of the Spanish-speaking countries in Central America, but there were also other countries. Colombia was there. There were Brazil, Chile. I can't even remember all the different countries. And they brought in the people, to talk about the problems they were having, and they brought in the international experts to give advice to the people about what was going on. One thing that I saw and I was discouraged about was that you did bring in some amazing talent. I was very blessed to be invited, and were others. But some of the experts that were brought in, the international experts, they didn't really want to help the people in Central America unless somebody was writing a checkbook. And I know that is, writing a check to them, because I remember there were times you would ask us to all get together, and you'd broken the groups, here's the people from Panama, here's the people from Nicaragua, Guatemala, Costa Rica, all the different ones, and talking about what were the problems, how do we fix them, where do we go from there. But what I found was the international experts that were brought in, a lot of them, they didn't want to participate. And I was so really discouraged by that, because it took a lot of money to bring these international experts into these conversations. And then some of those experts just made it all about, well, I'm not going to tell you what I think, or I'm not going to give you my knowledge, because you need to pay for that. And I just was very discouraged by that. And I thought, how do the people feel when they see international experts acting that way? I'll tell you, that was very discouraging for me to see. And so what I did was I found the people in the room that were willing to do what we'd been brought there to do, which was help the people. So things like that really get in the way as well. And I want to, before you answer that, I know that Antonio wanted to make a comment along with this, so I'm going to turn it over to him so that you can answer it all. You can comment back on everything. Go ahead, Antonio.
No. As you know, I follow a lot of conversation about accessibility that they don't necessarily relate with AXSChat. They relate to many different things that are happening around the world. So, basically, let's say in your gut and your experience, do you think that was, so they're not willing to answer, but were they really ready to answer and to understand the contents and the needs of people in South America? Or they feel, well, maybe I'm not going to take the risk of answering, maybe I might be exposed? So just a thought on that.
Okay, so yeah, we had the experts coming, and when we had them do their keynote speeches, they did great. But then we had a working session, and on that working session, we separated the countries, because we needed to create a global roadmap for what was going to happen now. So we separated the countries, and of course, we had an international table. That's where Deborah found that they didn't want to share. And the thing is, Antonio, it's not that they were not ready. They had been spending 3 days already with the people of Central America and speaking with them, knowing what they were going through, being in a conference room with them 8 hours a day, I think you can get enough context to at least give something.
Right.
And Deborah did, actually. Deborah gave us a lot of things that we were able to use on that final document. But most of them, they were not willing. It was a wasted session for them because they didn't want to do anything without some sort of contract. And yes, that's completely wrong from my perspective, because we were doing a lot of work and effort to bring them, because we needed that knowledge, and we didn't have the money to pay them. If we had, we would have. Right. That's the thing. We were trying to do as much as we could with the limited funds that we had. So that's where I'm coming from. That for me, it was not right, and it actually ended up tackling our process, because we had to create the roadmap without that input, and then the roadmap was not adopted as well as it would have.
And I just think it's an important point, because I have gone to so many of these things, and so have you, Neil and Antonio. We get invited as experts to speak all over the world. But I was really so discouraged to see that happen, because these people, these are real issues that they're having. I was really surprised, and I've talked about it before, but as we were talking to the people in Panama, and there's so much amazing stuff happening in Panama, but when they were talking about when the country was doing their first census, and they were going around the country of Panama trying to identify how many people with disabilities are in Panama. The people back in the villages and the mountains of Panama, when they saw these government officials coming, they hid their people with disabilities, their children with disabilities, because they thought the government was coming to take these people away from them. And now, see, that's something that it would never occur to me to think about that. And so, and there were just all these issues that I just had never been exposed to as somebody that is an international expert, but still I hadn't been exposed to it. And all it made me think was, I want to move to Central America and help these people. These are beautiful people. They're trying so hard. They're working so hard. But a big problem, very big problem, was I only speak English and they speak a different language. And so, dumb American, I need to learn to speak different languages. But I was so discouraged at the behavior of the experts, not all of them, but there was a few. And I was like, and a lot of them were writing down different information. There was one gentleman, he was writing down all these great ideas, and he showed it to me. And I said, well, can I have a copy of it so I can give it to UNESCO, since that's why we were there. And he's like, oh, no. I'm going to be giving them a proposal, and they're going to have to pay us a lot of money to get this. And I just think that kind of behavior, we must stop it. We must stop it. We are the world. And so I'm very proud of AXSChat, that we are trying to talk about these conversations. There are a lot of Spanish speakers in the world, and it's not just about Spanish speakers. It's about Portuguese speakers, and it's about Arabic speakers, and all the other languages that are out there. And I think it must be so discouraging sometimes to know that so much is happening in the English language that we're not pushing out into the other languages. Now, I am proud that my new book, Inclusion Branding, that David has worked with another gentleman to turn it into Spanish. And Nabil Eid, who is one of the participants on AXSChat, he has translated it into Arabic. And then I've got to translate it into audio. What can we do as a world? I know I needed an audio so bad, but what can we do as a world to make sure we're all included in all our different languages? And I believe, excuse me if this is incorrect, but there's like 12 national UN languages that things should be, translated into. But how do we make sure that we get the information out to everybody, and that those that have the knowledge, that we care enough about these people to help? And I know that, Neil, you wanted to comment, so let me get off my soapbox.
Okay. So I see this. I think for me, I have the luxury of being able to give information freely because I'm employed. So that being an employee part of my role enables me to have a roof over my head and be paid and all the rest of it, which means that I don't have to hold something back in order to get paid. Yeah. You're not in the same case, Deborah. So the fact that you are giving is an important thing. And I think we've got to try and find that delicate balance between ensuring that people who work in the disability space get paid for their work and can be sustainable, because it shouldn't be all about charity. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we're not taking advantage of people by withholding information that we should be collaborating on and we should be sharing. So I think there is a need for balance here, and I can't comment on something that I wasn't party to, but I was just coming from. I know I come from a slightly different perspective, and I have the comfort of being an employee, which means that it's much easier for me to be able to share because I don't have to think about, is this going to generate income for me? But I don't think that should be such an impediment that we stop collaborating. I'm very much pro collaborating, and I believe that through collaboration we can actually probably make more money.
I agree. And you've done collaboration with the Business Disability Forum and with
Absolutely.
the ILO GBDM.
Yes.
And I know that Antonio wants to make a comment, but I do want to make sure that I do a distinguish there. I agree. So much of our work, people just expect us to do for free. I run a company. I have to, pay amazing talent like David that works for me as my chief strategic officer. But that was a different situation. We were invited to come to Costa Rica. They paid all of our expenses. They paid all of our meals with the understanding that we were going to help them come up with a framework.
Absolutely.
So they did not surprise us and say, oh, and by the way, now what I really am tired of, major brands, and this happens all the time, coming to me and asking me to do all this work for free. It happens all the time. And I do some of it for free because I want them in the conversation. But, these gigantic corporations that say, just send me all your books for free, Deborah. It's like, come on. But I think there's, so there's some kind of balance there. But that's an excellent point you brought up, Neil. And Antonio, let me turn it to you, and then we can let David, our guest, talk too. So
I was just saying that when you basically close the door, and how can people be able to evaluate what you can do? How can they evaluate even your empathy? No, there's someone here that really wants to help us. Maybe he was able to give us this. Maybe we should start different type of conversations and bring them in at a different level. So you don't even close the door, and you don't even let them know how willing you are to build that relationship. So I think that especially in Latin culture, if you are not able to give away that level of show some level of empathy at the personal level, you're not going to be able to establish a communication. So they just put down the door by behaving like that. It's not about we understand that people need to make money and need to live and as be paid for their work, but if you want to understand how to communicate in Latin countries, you need to be able to give that hand. At least you need to be able to start the conversation at some stage, and by behaving like that, you are just shutting down the door.
Yeah, I agree. David?
That's absolutely true. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I am actually a firm believer that if you give more, you get more. That's the way the universe works. So when you try to take everything and keep it to yourself and don't give it away unless someone pays you, then you're doing it wrong. That's not the way life works. That's not the way that you want to be. That's not the way that we were meant to be. I don't think so. I think that if we give away what we can, we will get more, and we will get bigger contracts, and we will create a sustainable economy for accessibility. But as Antonio was saying, in Latin countries, that's even more true, because we need that empathy, that I don't know, we call it calor. Like we need that we need to feel that people are interested in us. We need that. And when we feel that, we create bigger and better relationships. And that's the way you do it, not the other way around, trying to keep it away from us and tell us we have something great here. Because if you do that with Latin countries, we don't want it. It's not that cool.
That's a great point. So how can we practically share more? How can we give more freely of knowledge and everything else? So, for example, we've got Elaine here doing the captions right now. Maybe one of the things we can do is use that transcript to translate that and put it into other languages as well. And maybe that's something that we need to be considering both ways. So if but obviously there's an overhead to that. So how can we best meet that overhead of going backwards and forwards between the different cultures and the different languages?
Well, I think that there's a lot of work that we need to do, and there's a lot of experimentation that we have to do, because this is something that's completely new. So we have to try it out. Everything that comes into your mind on how you can share information with someone else in another culture or country, you have to try it out. And if it works, it's fantastic. And if it doesn't work, well, you tried. and that's where we're coming from, and that's why we're translating Deborah's book into all of these languages, because we know that's going to work. And that's why we're trying to translate our website and translate everything to see if it works. And that's why I started doing the tweets in Spanish, to see what happened. And well, we've seen that it's having its very good repercussions in AXSChat. So we need to try it out and start trying different things until we can create a framework to actually include all in these conversations.
So we're the models. We're the models, and we're showing other people how they can contribute. We've been doing AXSChat every single Tuesday since November 2015. And it always slightly amuses us. 2014, thank you. And so, thank you, Neil. And it always amuses us when people are saying, I'm going to start my own chat. It's like, you go for it, because we need good, solid content, but a little bit more to it. I mean, guest bail on you at the last minute. We don't have it in all the languages we would like to have it in, but we're very committed to getting these messages out here. And we know that all this content that we've put together over all these years, there's so much content there that could be used to make a difference for countries like Central America. So I think we're modeling good behaviors. I know you, David, are modeling amazing behaviors. You amaze me as such a young man. And I often say, and I know we're out of time, but this is a topic for a different conversation, but I always ask David, why do you care so much at such a young age? Because David started working for my company when he was 25. He's 26 now. He's going to get married in November. So, but we've talked a lot about the younger people really caring about giving back to the world. So that's a different conversation. But I'm excited about where we're going. But I'm very thankful for Antonio and Neil's leadership, putting AXSChat together to begin with. But this takes a lot of work, what we're doing, but we believe in it, and that's why we're doing it. So I know that we need to close, so I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you, Neil.
Okay, so thank you, Deborah. I think that it's gratifying the length of time we've managed to sustain it. It's always amazing just how many people have been engaged. And we need to continue to thank people like MyClearText and like Barclays for supporting us over this endeavor, because without the support of others, we wouldn't be able to sustain it in the same way. I'm looking forward to growing it as well as sustaining it. So thank you, everyone. Look forward to having a great chat on Twitter. I just managed to get that all wrong. Let's see how it comes out in the transcript. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, guys. You're amazing.